So now it's time for the sponsor perspective portion of the program presented by the Council for Affordable Health Coverage. For that, I'd like to welcome on stage James Greenwood, President and CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, and Mark Merritt, President and CEO of the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association. They will be interviewed by Joel White, President of the Council for Affordable Health Coverage. Joel, over to you.
Thank you so much for having us here today, and you couldn't attend an event without a commercial, and so this is it. So welcome, Jim and Mark, and appreciate you taking time to talk about this issue today. The Council for Affordable Health Coverage is a multi-stakeholder advocacy group that came together to do a simple thing, which is lower health care costs. And we found out that's really hard. We've been at this since 2001. But we saw a real need in the drug space, and we, 2 years ago, started working on policy approaches to lower drug costs and improve health outcomes. And so we've come up with a set of actionable policy solutions, and we've tried to bring together very diverse stakeholders to support these reforms. And all told, we think these changes will help lower drug costs when fully implemented by about $71 billion a year. And that's real money even in Washington, D.C. But our goals are to improve competition by getting more generics and more brands on the market, to create more price leverage and negotiations, good competition. Secondly, we want to pay for value over volume. And you've heard a lot of that from Congressman Blumenauer and Bouchon and Murphy today. And there's things that we need to do to update our laws that are decades old to help effectuate that. And then thirdly, we need the data and the infrastructure in place to help make those value-based arrangements fruitful. So I want to talk a little bit and have a conversation, Jim and Mark, with you all, because we are bringing together some very diverse stakeholders and hopefully Republicans and Democrats around this issue. And Jim, why don't I start with you? You know, finding consensus on these solutions is not an easy task. You want to talk a little bit about how to bring diverse stakeholders together, because your congressional career and your time at Bio has been marked by bringing diverse stakeholders together.
So in the ecosystem between when our companies innovate a drug and it gets into the patient, there are steps that it must follow. The PBMs have a role to play, the insurers have a role to play, the distributors have a role to play, the pharmacist has a role to play. And in many cases, we have to work together, but we also recognize that we have different interests. Our interests are maximizing profits to some extent, and the PBMs and the insurers are to get the best price. So, of course, there's a tension there. But it does make sense for us to periodically say, well, where can we agree and where can we get along? I don't know if you ever saw the movie called The Christmas Truce, but in World War I, they had a brief truce, and the Brits and the Germans came out and played football and sang Christmas carols and exchanged drinks, and then they went back into their trenches and started shooting each other. So that's sort of what this is like.
Very good. Very uplifting. So, the first part, anyway. Right.
The first part. So just very quickly, so we've heard a lot from, I think the Democrats put out their better deal proposal this week, and part of that is let's get Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices. Can you both speak to that issue, and what are we seeing in the marketplace, and how that might be effectuated?
Good. Okay. So if you look at the problem that we're trying to solve here. I was in a senator's office, Democratic senator's office yesterday, and I said something that was shocking to him. I said, your constituents aren't really upset about the price of drugs. So what do you mean they're not? I said, well, they're actually upset about what comes out of their pocket. And so that's largely the problem that we're trying to solve. And what the Democrats have proposed doesn't get to that. It doesn't solve that problem. They have suggested that the Secretary of Health and Human Services should negotiate directly with the innovators over the prices of drugs, either not recognizing or not being aware of the fact that when that program was designed, and I was in Congress when it was, the whole idea was to have the private insurers administer the program. So the big ones, United Health and others, actually negotiate prices, and so prices within Medicare are 10% lower than they are in the commercial market. So the negotiation is working. The only way and the CBO said that the only way it would save any money is if the secretary then had the right to deny the patients, the beneficiaries, certain drugs by just not allowing them to be on the formulary. And that's not in the interest of the beneficiaries. The other thing they proposed is importation of drugs from Canada. Canada obviously doesn't make enough drugs to supply the needs of the United States of America. And 80% of the drugs that come into Canada come from places like India and China. And there were real safety concerns there. And that's not just I saying that. That is, the last 4 FDA commissioners have said that there is a significant safety issue that would result from massive importation of drugs from Canada or anywhere else.
Yeah, and I'd chime in here. I agree with what Jim's saying on that. Is I think what people are sick of are phony solutions. Price controls is a phony solution. Democrats, Republicans understand it's not going to reduce costs unless you really restrict choices. That's something that manufacturers, payers, like the people we represent and others, all agree on. Reimportation, another phony solution. I think Dr. Scott Gottlieb at FDA has it right. There is no silver bullet to this problem, because here's what the real problem is. There is amazing health innovation going on today. There are people who are living longer than ever, and this country hasn't made a decision that it wants to spend a lot more on health care. It's really that simple. It's really not good guys and bad guys. We have a marketplace where there, like any other marketplace, where there are sellers, Jim's members, manufacturers, and there are buyers, the people we represent. Sellers, as Jim said, in the history of selling anything to anybody, always want the best price they can get. Buyers, in the history of buying anything, like us, we want the lowest price that we can get. But we both need each other because Jim's companies have access, they have products that people need, that patients need. But on the other hand, we have a lot of patients that he wants access to and his members want access to, so we meet in the middle and negotiate. And one of the other reasons I think that direct negotiation is really a scam, and why I like CAHC pulling this together and actually finding some common ground, because there always is some common ground, is the negotiation is so strong in Part D, and individual PBMs, some of them have twice as much negotiating power as Medicare Part D. There are, 40 million people in Part D? Some of our PBMs have 80 million lives. So we already have more negotiating power than the program in and of itself. And the other thing is, I think if you look at, you see this going on with ACA right now with, people don't like ACA, they don't like the repeal of ACA, and the reality is neither one of them is the solution in and of itself. The reality is the only solution is more competition, getting acceleration of generics and brands to market. That's how we can negotiate lower prices. That's how we did it on really expensive products like Sovaldi. When it first came out, it offered no discount, no rebate. But then when there was competition, PBMs were able to generate big discounts because there was competition. So we need to work on that, work on value-based purchasing, which is something that's in our interest and the manufacturers as well, because they have a lot of confidence that their products can solve certain problems. We don't want to pay for drugs that don't work for certain individuals. We want to pay by indication, by outcome, other things like that. It'll increase efficiency and savings in a real way. So, we've seen this before in the marketplace 20 or 30 years ago when all these great new brands came out. People said, oh, there's nothing we can do about that. We need price controls. The market responded. The PBM industry emerged. You had real policy solutions like Medicare Part D emerge. You had generic wave hit the market, and all of a sudden those became affordable. That same thing will happen here. We just need to give it some time, and we need to avoid solutions that really make the problem worse. And I think that's what Jim and I are both talking about. We disagree on a lot of stuff, but neither one of us wants to see the situation get worse than it is, and we think there's a lot of hope to make it better with some common sense solutions.
And let me make a point if I could. I think people complain a lot about why is it that prices for drugs are so much higher in the U.S. than they are elsewhere. And that is an absolute true statement. They are. They're less expensive. We're more expensive than Canada and Europe because they have price controls in those countries. But here's the reality that most people don't understand. I represent about 1,000 companies. Most of them are startups. And 90% of them will fail. And 90% of all clinical trials, whether it's by a small startup company or whether it's by Johnson & Johnson, will fail. In Alzheimer's, it's 96% of all clinical trials have failed. Now, who wants to invest in an industry that fails 90% of the time, okay? Well, we still are able to attract venture capitalists. We'll still invest in our small companies. Large companies who are publicly traded can still sell their stock. And the reason they can is because investors know that in a relatively free market, they have a chance of getting a return on their investment. As soon as you impose price controls, and even when Hillary Clinton tweeted about it, the investors ran away. The biotech index dropped 20%. So the price that we pay for we innovate 57% of all the drugs in the world, and the drugs that are innovated in Europe and Asia are innovated largely for our market. And the science will never stop us from curing every disease known to man. Our scientists will do that, as long as we have a marketplace in which investors are willing to take a risk and be rewarded for that risk.
If I can just, one more thing on why what you're doing is so important, Joel, too, is I think where the politics of this are, too, are, I think this administration, I think probably most people in Washington, in the end, when you get past the rhetoric, they don't want to wreck the marketplace. They don't want to wreck innovation. They don't want to wreck payers' abilities to get savings. They want to build, like they did in Medicare Part D, build on what works, what's proven to have worked in the marketplace, and find ways to improve access. These are going to be incremental measures that will help the system get better. But in terms of broad brush policies, you have to be very careful that they have a much greater risk of making things worse than better. So we all need to be careful about doing things and just kind of making things up in Washington as opposed to building on what's proven to work in the real world.
Look to the private sector. All right, well, we only get 10 minutes, and that was our 10 minutes. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to our guests.
Thank you.